our topic today is virtual mentoring, which seems pretty timely because none of us are actually seeing kids, or most of us are not actually seeing kids. Lynna has had some experience with mentoring in general, but also with the virtual mentoring as well. So I'm going to let her, she's a longtime 4-H staff, and so I'll let her kind of tell you a little bit more about her background. But I think she's got a lot to offer us today. So Lynna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Okay, thank you, Brad. I am glad to be here with you guys today, and I'm pretty excited that there are so many of you that are interested in the topic. And I've been on some of the grantee director calls, and I know a lot of you have already started doing some of this virtual mentoring by calling or texting your families or even the children in the program to make sure that they stay connected. So that's a really important thing, especially in this current situation that we're in. So I will, ready to share my screen, Brad. And as Brad said, I worked for Missouri 4-H directly, and I think I do still in an indirect way. And so learned a lot about working with at-risk youth and families. And so that's part of where my experience came from. And I do have some experience working in after-school settings as well, in communities that I've worked in previously. And typically, oops, see, I'm already messed up. Typically, I do presentations with 2 screens. So I don't know if you use Zoom a lot or that kind of thing, but now I need to get back to the beginning. See, you think you're ready to go and you're not. So you can see my presentation in reverse. So, you may have seen that this session description is, you know, about reaching out to school-age kids to give them safety learning and skill building in these times when we don't have access to be able to see the children. You know, you may run into in the community a little bit because I know towns are small, and I did some work in St. Louis, and I was really surprised at how small St. Louis is. People stick in their community. So you may run into the children when you do have times that you are able to be out and get your essential items. But anyway, this needs to continue, and we can use mentoring to keep kids engaged and keep them have a positive contact outside their house and keep them connected to the broader community. So our objectives today is we're going to explore virtual mentoring after school setting. I'm going to use the terms interchangeably. If I say virtual, I also mean e-mentoring and vice versa. We're going to talk about some methods of virtual mentoring, and we're going to discover some technology resources that can be used in virtual mentoring. And then we're going to have some tools of things that you can do whenever you are talking to your kids on whether it's social media or texting or the telephone or that kind of thing. Okay, so I think that what we're going to talk about today is for everyone that's involved in the after-school setting, and I am assuming that some of you have volunteers and teens that are working in your program. So I don't know that you will have them serving as mentors, but I want to say certainly that you could. I know some sites might use teens in the A+ program to help work and help carry out the daily activities when you're at the school or your community setting. So I think that this is for everyone. Is my screen still shared, Brad? Okay. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to think about who were mentors that you had as you were a child, and what was the relationship you had with them? How often did you interact with that person? And do you currently have a mentee? You know, whether it's a formal setting or an informal setting. So, so thanks to all of you for doing that. And I just want to wonder, had you had mentors as a child? And I would say that my mentor as a child would have been my Aunt Faye. And she was a single woman, and I thought she was one of the bravest people in the world. But, you know, aunts are, I think, good mentors, and we see lots of things about aunties and aunts and the t-shirts and all those fun things about aunts, you know, being good at working with their little nieces and nephews. And so I think a lot of times that our mentors are family members when we're as a child. But, you know, if you think about people that you knew in your community or, you know, your school or that kind of thing, that we have a lot of mentors like that. So if people don't mind, I want to ask you the next two questions, and I want you to put it in chat. So how often did you interact with that person? You know, like, did you see that person just a few times a year, or was it weekly or monthly, or was it someone you saw daily, maybe a neighbor person? And I'm just kind of interested in that. If you'll put that in the chat box, the frequency of your interaction with your main mentor that you're thinking of. Weekly, daily, right. Coaches. Good. I think of my aunt, and I did not see her all the time. She lived in St. Louis, and I live in a real part of the state, but occasionally she'd send a card, and that was a good day whenever she sent a card to you just out of the blue or something like that. And then, or even a phone call or that kind of thing. So I tried to relay some of those things when as my nephews were growing up, and be that kind of aunt that that mine was too. So, but typically whenever we think about mentoring, the relationship in traditional mentoring research is that it should not be someone who is related to you. But I think most of us probably had lots of mentors that were that way, and we learned a lot from them just as well. So and then my question to you now is, do you have what you would consider a mentee? Whether that's a family member or a student or a friend of the family. I know sometimes people are godparents, and I think that they're considered mentors. So do you have a mentee in your life currently? Okay, so we're getting lots of yeses, a few no's, not too many. So I think sometimes we think about having mentees. You know, there's formal relationships and there's informal relationships. And so the times that sometimes we're in a school setting, you know, as I said, I worked for 4-H for a long time, and I did not often seek out mentees, young people that, you know, had kind of a special attachment to me. But you know, it wasn't a formal relationship. But I'm thinking of a particular young woman who was, you know, she was a junior in high school, and she just, you know, I learned a lot from her, and I hope that she learned a lot from me. And so, so sometimes those relationships are formal and sometimes they're informal. And so the after school setting provides us an opportunity to have a formal relationship as a mentee. And again, as we talked about, as the COVID situation is going on and kids are removed from the program, then we can begin to develop some formal relationships. Oh, I see Brad's mentioned he was with Big Brothers Big Sisters. So yes, a very good mentoring program. So okay. About virtual mentoring or e-mentoring, and it's also referred to as electronic mentoring, digital, online, or computer assisted, and it has any type of mentoring that uses a digital technology. And so the source I used, I'll share with you towards the end, is the effective elements of effective practice for mentoring, and this is from mentoring.org. And I think it's very interesting that they just created this document in December of 2019. So it's a very timely document, and I have the link that I'll share with you at the end that we will use. So a lot of my resources today are coming from that, and then this is the language that we're going to use. This virtual mentoring and e-mentoring are the same thing. So digital mentoring has been around for about 20 years, and that was a bit surprising to me when I thought about the timeline on it. But, you know, about the year 2000, people were having more access to computers and cell phones and texting old school, that kind of thing. Some of us remember that. So that was increasing, and that's when it really began to kind of be a practice, but it's really grown quite a bit more over the last few years. So virtual mentoring has been used in the juvenile justice setting, where there's not contact face and then also kids that are in communities, but still juvenile justice. STEM education uses virtual mentoring quite a bit to connect young people to people who are working at, say, Boeing or IBM or something like that, where they can help kids begin to build skills in STEM by knowing someone who's actually practicing in that field. Mental health field has used virtual mentoring, as well as helping kids get ready for college readiness. So to help make sure that they're filling out all the financial aid they need, they're taking the right courses and that kind of thing. So colleges have e-mentoring in that way to help get kids ready to go to college. So this is our first poll, Brad, so you're on. So my question is, and like I said, I've talked to some of you, but let's just do a poll policy. Are you using virtual contact or mentoring with the children in your program? So we'll leave this open, see how many people vote. Okay, we have over half have responded.
So there's also some that in the chat box, Lynna, somebody told me that on Chromebooks, yeah, so they just posted it. Chromebooks.
That's right.
So yeah, if you want to just put that over in the chat box, we can look there too. So
and you're bringing up something for me to remember later on about Chromebooks. So
yeah, I don't know what it is.
Talk about technology.
Yeah. So there's quite a few over there in the chat box, some of those answers. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll on the screen. And then you want me to go ahead and share the results?
Yeah, I mean, I can see them. Can everybody else? So,
there we go.
So it looks like about a third of you definitely are doing virtual contact and mentoring with the children. Almost a third are not. And then let's see me do my math here. Anyway, 27% are not, and 13% are considering it. And then almost 30% of you are working on that. So I think that that's a good thing, and we'll get some more feedback from you about this in just a little bit. So, okay, so good to know. That helps us know, and then it lets us know that we have some people in the community that are resources for this. So, okay. All right, so I'm going to back up just a little bit to a little bit more of the research behind mentoring. The mentoring.org is kind of the lead on this. There are certainly other national level and state level mentoring programs, but they have a document called The Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring. And they have, as you can see here, the 6 standards for mentoring centered around these topics. And so what we'll talk about today is, I'm going to go through them briefly, and then we'll talk about how you can incorporate these into a virtual mentoring setting. So, so their 6 standards are recruitment, finding suitable volunteers, staff members, whoever that might be, to become the volunteers for, the mentors for the children. Screening, as we all know, is very important. So screening would include whether or not they are suited to the program. But then screening also would mean that they would need to pass a criminal background check, child abuse, neglect, or whatever your organization may say. So it gives standards on what you should be doing for that. Certainly, training is a big part of any of our staff. or volunteers that we may have in our program. So they need to have adequate training to be able to do that. The next step is matching and initiating the program between the mentee and the mentors. And so I have to go back and say recruitment also applies to recruiting the mentees. And, I know I had some affiliation with Big Brothers Big Sisters in St. Louis. And so they always had lots and lots of kids that wanted to have mentors, but finding qualified and well-trained and suited mentors was a little bit of a trick. So training for them, and then matching and initiating the matches. So you have to find the right combination and that kind of thing. So I think in our after school setting that this is going to be just a little bit different. So the other thing about mentoring that's very important is monitoring the mentor-mentee relationship, and then supporting the youth and the mentor both as well. So I think that's another thing about it, as we launch into this digital mentoring, that those are some things that we need to think about, and how are we going to monitor that kind of thing, because we know all of the things that can go wrong in the digital age. And then typically whenever you have a mentoring relationship, there is a time when the relationship is set to end. So certainly my relationship with my aunt did not end. I mean, she was my mentor, in different ways my whole life. But in this setting, you say, well, is this through the end of the school year, or will it be over summertime, or just a set time that the mentor and the mentee both know what to expect from the program? So this is like I said, I'll share this at the end. It's quite a few pages, but it is very, very detailed, and it has two pieces of it. It has like the research behind it and so forth, and then it has the some supporting, abridged document that goes with it. So anyway, the key piece for learning about effective practice. Okay, so these are some things that I want us to think about. We may have some things that I'm assuming, and I could be wrong by this, but to start a mentoring program, you probably, at your school, you have some methods in place, or your community-based organization, whatever it may be, that is already in place. So whenever you talk about recruitment, you have youth that already enroll in the program. Their parents have given you consent for them to be in the program and that kind of thing. So then you also have hired program staff, which you've recruited from the community. They've been vetted, and you've chosen them to be those individuals, as well as programs that have volunteers. You do the same thing. You've got a process. I know my work in 4-H, there's a whole method about how you recruit volunteers and screen them, train them, and all of those kinds of things. And so likely your school or organization has those things in place. Screening, again, same thing. You've probably got an in-house system of how you can do that. And so if you're thinking about adding additional mentors, you need to consider those things about making sure that the people are screened. Because as I said, I watch the news and I see all kinds of things about inappropriate relationships between, teachers and students, and or whatever the category of a community person may be, and it becomes high profile. And so we want to do all we can to protect the young people in the program. So, and again, the training, likely you have procedures on there. And then I'm going to say training is going to cross over into some things that we could make sure that we add additional training on eMentoring. So likely your program staff that you have in your program, you probably may not have done a lot of training about how to interact with young people in a virtual mentoring session. So so that could be something for the future, but certainly you have training for the procedures. They learn about youth development, how to keep kids safe, and all those kinds of things. So I would say definitely you're halfway there as in regards to the effective practices that mentoring would require. Okay, so these I'm and I'm making some assumptions, but there's some standards that you might want to consider as you move forward, because certainly one program director cannot be the mentor for 60 children in a program. So um, this is a step about matching and initiating the mentor and mentee relationship, is to match your youth with the program staff. So I believe it was Monette. I think it was, they had Cubs, and they had people who were assigned to a small number of children. So you may already have some natural matching that is set up within your program, uh, so that, you know, it's certainly a staff member that the kids already know and are familiar with and are willing to interact with. So that is something to have a consideration towards. Then if you don't have that, you might want to work on that aspect of assigning program staff to a certain number of children, just because of, you know, the number of kids in the program. You want to, I mean, of course, I know you already have ratios in the after school program, but it might help to spread the kids out. So my thought is, you know, maybe 5 or 6 kids. That may not be feasible. You know, you may go up to 10. I know the ratio that we work with in Missouri 4-H is 1 to 10 on, you know, chaperoning and that kind of thing. So that's probably a manageable number, but certainly you'll have to look at what your program is and what makes sense for it. Again, on matching, you know, sometimes there's kids we just don't gel with. So you might, if there's a kid in your Cub pack, and you might want to trade with somebody, maybe that child responds better to another person. So be open to that. Don't, you know, don't be tied just to that kind of thing. And you might, for example, when I was at Monette, I'm going to call it out again, they had the school resource officer is one of their program staff. And so they might, you know, think about, you know, he'd be matched for another child who might be wanting, you know, work someday in public service or something like that. So even think about shifting it up. So it's good to match kids that have an interest maybe in what you already know, or or have a similar thing to consider whenever you're matching children. Oops. And then the other thing you need to consider is, how often are you going to meet with your mentee? So several of you gave some feedback on the when you met with your personal mentor. You know, a lot of you met daily, and certainly if you're in the after school setting, you know, you do see the kids daily with the exception of the weekends. So that's another thing to consider. You know, maybe it might be that you just do that once a week. And so I say that the shorter the window of the mentoring time, so like if you say you're just mentoring children for 6 months, then probably you should meet every 2 weeks or something like that. Or if you can call them twice a week, then you know, it's just whatever the choice of the program is, of what the frequency is. But come up with a plan on that, and that helps you know when to schedule, when to call your kids, or whenever to schedule a video conference, or whatever the case may be. So then the other thing is the monitoring and support. So whenever it's, you know, it's just standard record keeping like you do for your after school program. So say you have 5 mentees, make sure you keep track of your contact with them and what supports they might provide. So you will probably have maybe scheduled times that you will call or video conference or whatever you decide to do. Your children, keep track of that. And then also if they want to give you give you a call, you know, if that's how you decide you want to do that, or they'll send you a text or something like that, keep track of those kinds of things. And so those are important things to do in the event too. It's, you know, for your own safety as well. So, and then also to know what impact your program is having. So, and again, we talked about closure. We don't know what's going to happen in the current situation, but even if you in the fall when school's back and that kind of thing, and you want to do mentoring anyway, you know, so you could contact the kids over the holiday break at the end of the year or something like that. So again, have a plan for when it's going to end, and then you decide whether you're going to continue the relationship or the child goes on to a different grade and chooses a different mentor if your school program wants to do that. So, okay, I see some chat coming up. Is there something we need to check on that?
Yeah, Lynna, just the question of, do you set up a mentoring program through the administration if your program is school-based?
I would say, let me see, is it, okay, so you're talking about, is it a community-based organization in the school? Denise? Yeah, Denise.
Yeah, Denise, if you want to unmute yourself, you can.
Yeah,
No,
let's be interactive.
it's actually a school-based program that the children who go to school there participate in the after-school program at the ECC and the elementary.
Okay.
So they have a mentoring type of program at the middle school and high school, and I don't know if they started that through the administration or what, but
Okay.
how would you do that, at the early childhood center or the elementary school?
Mm-hmm. I would say probably these are going to be, very specific to where you're programming. The schools will likely have different rules on that kind of thing than maybe a community-based organization. So I'm sure, like Big Brothers Big Sisters, that their requirements are quite stringent, where others may not be quite as specific. So I'm going to defer to check with what your school says. Unless you are community-based occurring in a school, and you can use your own rules. So.
Yeah. So
but I would say, go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say, Cassie chimed in, and I know Cassie's school-based, and I think Hillary is school-based as well. And they both said that they're restricted on reaching out virtually now.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that's probably you defer to your admin on what they would say, what's allowed and what's not.
Yes, because I know in my past experience with 4-H, when cell phones and so forth first came out, workers were pretty, even in a community-based, people we knew, we were still reluctant to give out our phone numbers. Now that's lightened up quite a lot over the years, but still it's a concern, and we'll address some of that more in a activity later on. So, okay, well. Okay, so those are some things to consider. Like I said, I think you'll have those first three probably very well in place. And then these for virtual mentoring, oops, looks like I got my numbering messed up. But anyway, these last 3, 4, 5, and 6 are ones that you may have to put some more consideration into it to mesh with your previous 3 that you have. With the exception of training, you might have to do some additional training about what the rules for virtual contact with children might be. Okay. Okay, we have another poll. So this one has several questions on it, but which one is not a characteristic of virtual mentoring? So we leave the poll open for 1 minute plus. So permission from parents or guardians, staff time needed to connect with the youth, choosing the frequency, staff mentors conduct virtual mentoring from the school, child access to technology, staff mentors are trained to have appropriate child contact.
All right, so Lynna, I'm trying to pull up poll number 2, and it only is showing me poll 1. Oh wait, got it. Here we go. I just have to be smarter than my computer. There we go.
Oh, yeah, and I see that I could do it too. Okay, so take a couple of seconds to do that one. Which one do you think is not a characteristic of virtual mentoring?
And then if you're on a Chromebook or something else that doesn't allow you to vote on the poll, you can type your answers in the chat box.
All right, just a couple more seconds, and well, more than a couple.
We're close to half have voted. You let me know, Lynna.
Okay, that's good. 1 minute's plenty of time. So you guys are very astute. I did have a hard time coming up with characteristics that were not part of virtual mentoring. And so obviously it's the fourth one down, that staff mentors conduct virtual mentoring from school. It's you could, but it's not, it's not a requirement that they be conducted from school. However, I can think of some places that, regarding questions that we just had, is that if there's some concern about security, internet security, or that kind of thing, that you would have to use computers from the school or something like that if you were doing those kinds of things. And then also too, we're learning about Zoom, that some schools are not allowing Zoom. So that would be a time you would have to do something else. So, okay, so thanks for that. And we'll go to the next section. So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the methods of relationships in eMentoring, and some of the concerns for it. So as I mentioned earlier, typically the old thought about mentoring was that mentoring was one adult to one child. And that was the previous research on that. And that still exists. Big Brothers Big Sisters uses that, and that's their model. But I think that in other situations, this group mentoring is just in recent years has become more known, in particular by mentoring.org. It previously wasn't recognized till probably about the last 7 years. But us in our youth development work, where we work in schools or 4-H or scouts or that kind of thing, we've been doing group mentoring for a long time. So typically group mentoring is where there are a couple of adults, from anywhere from 4 to 8 kids, and it could, even go up to 12 or so. But the advantage to group mentoring is, like, say Brad and I are in a one-to-one mentoring relationship. And so what happens if the week that I'm supposed to take him to the baseball game, I'm sick? I just, I can't do it. So Brad he's not going to be able to go to the baseball game. Well, he's not going to be able to go to the baseball game this summer anyway. So anyhow, but if me and Kay Lewis are mentors to him and Clint and Mark and others, then say if I can't go to the ball game, then there's still the relationship is going to be able to continue. That Brad's not out. He's still going to be able to go to the ball game, and Kay's going to be his mentor that day and help take care of things. And so that is one of the good things about group mentoring, and I'm happy that that is a thing that has the thought has come around to that, because as I said, we in some of these youth development organizations, we already know this, we already do this, and but it's being recognized from this angle. So so that's an advantage to that. So in your e-mentoring, you might want to consider to have maybe a primary person, but then if something would happen, say, like sometimes in programs there's turnover, and so say Brad quit, and then who's going to replace Brad? You have to rematch that child. So if you have this group mentoring set up, you don't have to worry about that kind of thing, that there's still continuity for the child, and that they don't have to start all over again. So another kind of mentoring is peer mentoring, and that is, where you work, teens may work with each other. Maybe a teen that's not doing very well in chemistry could have another teen as fellow student or something like that, that could help them do better, help them understand ways to understand chemistry better. So that is a thing that probably is not going to be used very much in virtual mentoring in the setting for after school, unlikely. And then again, there's the blended mentoring, which is a combination of the face-to-face and the virtual. So that's a pretty common thing that, you follow up with your mentee at other times after you maybe have had face-to-face time with them. So the other things, the methods that we'll talk, and we're going to get into more into technology, so hold with me. So there's asynchronous, that is things that you don't have to be right there to take care of it. So those would be things like email, a forum or a bulletin board, or live chat, text, or direct messages that you don't have to reply to right away. And so that's kind of a static thing, and it's, you know, they don't necessarily occur at the same time, even though you could be emailing back and forth at the same time, but still it's, you do this and then you do that. And then synchronous, as I said, we're learning about that. So video conferencing, whether it be Zoom or Google Hangouts, or whether it be like FaceTime or something like that. Those are things that happen real time, where you have face-to-face video with the children. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but there's also some commercial platforms that are set up specifically for virtual mentoring that people can use, and that is a safe place to do mentoring. So some commercial platforms, because they take out a lot of those concerns that you might have about internet safety and that kind of thing. So here's some other considerations. What are the ages that are appropriate for virtual mentoring? And so most virtual mentoring occurs for middle school, high school, and young adults. Elementary age virtual mentoring is delivered usually via these commercial applications. And so I know that younger kids are pretty tech savvy. So I guess middle school depends on what your definition is. You know, some schools, middle school may be, you know, as young as 6th grade. You know, I know we have intermediate schools. And so that is just going to be one of the things that you'll have to decide, how young can you go on virtual mentoring. So, and that's using just text-based. But certainly, if you make a phone call to a family and you say, hey, can I talk to Susie? Then that's kind of a permission thing, and you don't have to worry about that. That's a phone conversation, but still somewhat virtual mentoring. So another big concern that we got into a little bit in one of the other calls is, do kids have access to technology? And so broadband is a big issue here in Missouri. I do live remotely, but I happen to have a cell tower 3 miles away. And so I'm fortunate in that way. But if you go on another 20 miles from here, it is real spotty as far as that kind of service goes, and possibly even internet through your phone provider. Do kids have access to tablets or computers? That's another thing to consider. And I learned that lots of families have gaming systems which do have internet access, and so that is an option of that you could use that for virtual connection, depending on what platform you're trying to use. And then again, do you have an adequate internet connection or data plans? I know several of us are talking about, we have low broadband connection. You know, I have that pop up on mine occasionally. And so that's a consideration. And then, you know, will your data plan support this kind of thing? So a lot of people buy phone cards and that kind of thing, and that's how they get their data. So we need to be mindful of those kinds of things whenever we're setting up a virtual mentoring program. Okay, so I know that you can't see this, and so I think that I'm going to, I will share this with you. And but this is just some e-mentoring programs by the technology used. And so this is a little bit of the research behind it. And this comes from the effective practice document that I was telling you about earlier. And so it gives you some ideas about the kinds of things that you can use in an e-mentoring program. And it also tells some of the challenges of different kinds of settings. So I'm not going to go into that in great depth, because I'm going to give you a copy of it and you can see that. But it's some of the things that we already talked about, you know, some of the methods that you can use, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, what age of the kids, and the typical settings that you can use. So it talks about community schools and what the strengths and weaknesses are of the individual programs. So I definitely am going to share this with you at the end of the session with a hyperlink, or I may upload it. So let me see. Let's check chat. Let's see what's going on. Anything on chat, Brad? You're keeping an eye on it.
No, well, I mean, there's a little conversation. It's about schools engaging kids without the technology. So how are they, and the question was, how are they engaging in their schoolwork? So, yeah, a little bit of a side conversation going, but
Okay, that's fine.
all right. Yeah.
So yes, like I said, I will give you this document at the end. It's in the eMentoring document. So something to consider. So that's you know, help answer some of the questions that you might have about what works and what won't work. So we've talked about this just a little bit. Technology for virtual mentoring. Obviously there's phone calls, and you know, in a way this e-mentoring document doesn't talk a lot about phone calls themselves other than texting and so forth. So, you know, what's wrong with picking up the phone and making a phone call? You know, sometimes you can settle a lot of things a lot quicker, you know, whether it's our work or you know, just visiting with children. And so sometimes they're not real talky. I'm sure you know that kind of thing, but I've got a document that may give you some ideas for conversation starters with the kids. So obviously phone calls could be one-on-one, but you could also, depending on what kind of equipment you have, you could have conferencing options. And so even if your kids may not have video capability, you can do a little conference call. You know, I know that my smartphone, I think I can bring in 5 people. And so that will, you know, that would be a thing that you could try to do to get kids all talking to each other. And I know I've heard several of you say how excited they were when they saw each other on video conference calls. So obviously there's texting. I'm not sure how your school texting system works. I know a lot of schools use that. So that might be another option that you could use to have a safe setting for texting that is authorized by the school and that kind of thing. And then obviously you could use your individual texting, but then that would mean that you would provide your personal phone number. So those are some considerations there. But you might want to check to see if your school has their public one. And then I know that there's others that you can set up a texting group through other some apps. So if some of you know of those, you put them in the chat box, some of the texting platforms that are already available. And then I mentioned social media, and I just put down Facebook and Instagram. Certainly there's Twitter and Snapchat, and so we could have a discussion about whether we think those are safe or not. And so that I think that would just be something for your school to decide or your program to decide whether or not you're going to use them. But I know that right now, Facebook is being used a lot, you know, for some online some videos that have been put together for families to engage in, whether it be making, you know, something for a meal or planting a garden or whatever it may be during this time where kids are away from their school. And then there are these commercial mentoring platforms. iMentor has one, Sea Change Mentoring, and these are the commercial ones. So I am going to see if this works. We're going to go to I Could Be. So this I Could Be is one that you might want to consider for virtual mentoring. We have a hyperlink there. I'll send you guys the presentation. But they have a free membership to that right now. So that might be something that you'd want to check out. That would be a free platform for you guys to use if you wanted to explore some e-mentoring.
So, Lynna, there was a question about the benefit of Google Hangouts over Google Meet. Do you know about those?
I think it would just be your preference of, you know, what kind of platform you want to use. Most of my experience is with Hangouts, and you know, I haven't used Google Meet. So I think it's kind of personal preference, and then what, you know, your you know, what your organization would let you use. So I think it's best if you can stick with the same thing, so that all the staff can be trained in the same platform, and then your families maybe could have some interaction among each other about how to use it. So, you know, we know that Zoom's getting a little bit of pushback right now, but I think a lot of it is by making sure that, you know, the settings are right ahead of time. So, and then I see somebody mention Blooms.
Yeah, so was that Aaron talked about Blooms? And there've been a couple of what is Blooms, and so Aaron, if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay, that's a new one to me. So.
Yeah, unmute yourself and tell us what Blooms is.
Okay, so Blooms is very similar to Class Dojo. It's I think one of the major differences is, and this is why I chose it over the other, is I can set up, I can put in there an event, and then parents can pick their own time to come meet with me. So like parent-teacher conferences. But I can do a whole group post. I can set up different communities within Blooms, or I can do personalized chat with parents, and they can set up meetings. I can make parents ahead of a committee, things like that, similar to Class Dojo.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
There are so many things out there that you can use now that there's not just any one, but you'll just have to decide which one works best for you. So, okay, so those are some of the technology and programs that could be used for virtual mentoring.
And Lynna, did you say you're going to share your PowerPoint?
Yes, I mean, yes, certainly.
Okay.
And I sent you a copy of it. If you want to upload it, you can. So
Well, somebody had asked me, and I just wanted to make sure. Somebody had asked if you were going to share it, and just wanted to make sure that it's good with you if we share it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So there's another document that I discovered, and of course everybody is on the understanding about working remotely. So this is a pretty new document that it's hyperlinked at the bottom of my presentation, but there's some summarized tips for e-mentoring if you use text. So know the strengths and weaknesses of the communication tool you're using. So I think that that's kind of the thing that we're talking about on these other platforms, such as Blooms or Google Meet or Hangouts or Zoom or whatever it may be. So, so just know what it can and can't do. The second thing is put a lot of effort into the first few messages that you send to your mentee. You know, think about it, ask some questions. Like I said, I want to provide a document that has some conversation starters in it. So, and then this also suggests respond quickly, but not too quickly. And, you know, it makes me think about a staff person that I had that worked for me at one time. She would call me with a problem, and I'd call her right away. And it would be kind of a nothing problem, I'm not gonna lie. And so finally I learned not to call her back right away. I'd call her after a while, and then she had solved her problem. So, so this is kind of the same thing. You know, don't be readily available all the time, because it sets up an expectation later on that you will answer texts immediately, whether they email, you know, might text you at 7 in the morning or 11 at night or whatever your less preferred hours might be. And then take the uncertainty out of text communication frequency by scheduling. Just say, you know, hey, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to text my mentees and, you know, check in with them and see how they're doing. So just put that on your calendar and make sure that you get that done, so you don't say like at 3 in the afternoon, like, oh, I haven't texted my mentee yet today. So make sure that you go ahead and do that. So there's some tips. So like, as I mentioned, make sure you ask open-ended questions. And those of you working in the after-school setting know about how to ask open-ended questions. And then whenever you use emojis, GIFs, memes, or other digital flourishes, you can inject some humor into their interactions. And so if you can use these, if you can understand kind of the lingo of texting, that kind of thing, you can the kids respond better. So avoid language that can be easily misunderstood. You know, sometimes we have kind of a dark humor and kids don't get that. So make sure you're careful about that kind of thing, and going back to the memes and that kind of thing. So sometimes successful matches have misunderstandings. And if you communicate via text long enough, it's extremely likely that a participant will take issue with the tone, content, or meaning of a message. Has that ever happened to any of us? So sometimes you get a text and you're like, I'm calling them. So anyway, so be careful. Maybe read over your text to make sure that you're saying the right thing whenever you text your mentees. So those are some tips for that. And then I'm going to throw in one more thing about, some of you have mentioned that, but you know, there's just still the good old fashioned send the kid a letter or send them a card or that kind of thing. And so I know some of you have done that and because you've mentioned in the meetings and that sort of thing. So we have a project that this might be something that you could do for, that you could use some of your supply money on. We have a program for children of incarcerated parents, and we do what we call mail kits. So the child can write to their incarcerated parent, which communication is much better in the, that setting now. But still, everybody likes getting a card and letter. So basically, you decorate up a shoebox or something like that, and then you put writing supplies in it, put some stamps in it, maybe a little stuffed bear, or you know, some kind of a toy type thing, and then you give it to the students, and then make a plan for, you know, like once a week you ask them to send you a card, or they send a card to maybe their grandparents, or you know, however you want to do it. So that could help on their literacy skills. And then also you send them a card or postcard, and that gives them something to look forward to go to the mailbox that day. So that's pretty much an old school thing, but it's still, you're distant, and it could be well used. Okay. All right. I see that I am about to run out of time, and I am going to do one quick activity. I think we're going to skip this last poll, but just let's do this. So still, what is your biggest concern? And it's back to the same questions, but if you just, well, let's number these. Let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and leave off other. Which one of these is your biggest concern? I guess we can still do the poll, Brad, here.
Okay. Seeing the other one, my bad.
I think I can get it.
Here we go.
Okay.
Got it.
So still, what remains as your biggest concern? Yep, access to technology. So, and when I think of that, I also think of, do you have connection to enough data, internet connection, that kind of thing. Okay, so still biggest concern, and I know that's a concern for all of the, you know, in the online learning that schools are, some schools are expecting at this time. So, and then, you know, that's been a problem for a long time. It's still not solved. So, all right, so thanks for that. I'm going to do one quick thing. Oh, can I do this, Brad, or not? See if I've got a second.
What's up? What do you? It depends what you're going to do.
Okay, so does everybody have a pencil and a paper? I'm just going to ask you to draw something for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some instructions, and this is purpose of this is to, it's an activity that you could do with your kids when you do an eMentoring, and it's communication and a listening activity. So what I want you to do is get your pencil, and I want you to draw a circle about the size of a $50 on your paper. Are you doing this, Brad?
I'm not. If are you wanting to
you know, this,
share it?
Yeah, I want people to do this. Yeah.
So if you're done with your PowerPoint, if you stop sharing your screen, then maybe we could just have them hold them up.
Okay. I'm not through with my instructions yet.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I want you to draw a rectangle about 1 inch by 3 inches right under it, touching it. And then after you do that, on the right-hand side of the rectangle, touching the rectangle, I want you to draw a right angle triangle touching that. And then I want everybody to.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
At the top on the right-hand side of the rectangle, draw a right angle triangle that touches the rectangle. Okay, so that's my instructions. This is okay for what we're doing today. So now what I want you to do is everybody hold up their picture to their camera. And let's see what we came up with. Let me see, I need to do stop share. Or can you guys still see?
There you go. Now you can see more of the.
All right.
More of what they've got.
Okay. Cool. I'm loving it. Okay, so let's oops, shoot. Get back to my share screen. Okay, Brad, you can't see my screen, can you?
Can't see it. Nope.
I should have never left the Zoom. So, okay. Now I've got it minimized. Well, for some reason I have split screen.
Then if you want me to share my screen?
If you can.
Let's see if this will work.
Oh, here, I'm back. I got it back now, so. Okay, there we go.
Got it.
Okay, so this is what, of course, there's more instructions to it, but this is what it was supposed to look like. So I gave you the instructions for the circle, obviously, in the long triangle. So anyway, this is the example of, something that you could do with the kids, over the phone, which they would have to take a picture of it and maybe text it to you or something like that. But certainly if you're using video conferencing, it's a way to talk about that. But this activity is, what's the easiest thing? Well, I don't know. Maybe screen share could have been a lot better, but anyway, it helps us think of what are some barriers, like maybe not all kids have access to technology where they can see it, but they've got access to the phone. So also, this is a listening skill. And so I gave you all the same instructions, but you came up with different shapes and sizes and so forth. So this is and of course I've done this a few times, so I know to say, that the circle should be about the size of a $50, but some people may say just draw a circle and put it on top of a box. And so that's a way to help us to learn, be more specific. And so again, we can do this further, apply how's this activity to other areas of our life. So, you need to listen, to follow instructions. And you guys did not have the advantage of giving me feedback and saying, well, now, which side does the right angle triangle go on, or what is a right angle triangle, so forth. So it's just a good communication thing. So I'm going to pop to the next one. I will share this resource with you. This particular activity, Digital Communication 101, talks about boundaries whenever you do virtual mentoring. And so I will share this with you. And then also, these are just some sort cards that you can use these are just things you're going to have to work out on your own. So your mentee wants to have your cell phone number. So if you're texting, obviously they're going to have that. But then here's some others, like your mentee is sending friend requests to your family members and friends, what are the boundaries? So you're just going to have to think of some of those things. So this particular document has about 20 of these scenarios that you might want to work through whenever you're thinking about having a virtual mentoring program. So we won't go through that in the interest of time. So anyway, so questions if for those of you who are still here as I go over. So I do have, here's a list of the main resources, and then any of the documents that I've shared on the screen, I